The underestimated human. The Vrexian transport vessel's containment field hummed with an eerie blue glow as it sliced through the darkness of space. Inside one of its holding cells, Kira Jensen sat perfectly still, her dark eyes systematically cataloging every detail of her prison, while the other captives around her, a diverse collection of species from across the conquered sectors, had long since resigned themselves to despair. Kira's mind remained razor-sharp, analyzing, calculating, planning. The Vrexians had conquered nearly half the galaxy in less than a decade. Their technological superiority was unmatched, their military strategy flawless, their confidence absolute. They viewed other species as little more than resources to be exploited or obstacles to be eliminated. Humans had put up a particularly stubborn resistance, which had only made the Vrexians more determined to break them. Kira flexed her wrists against the neural dampeners that encircled them like metallic bracelets. The devices were the Vrexians' latest innovation, designed to suppress higher cognitive functions and creative thought. A guard passed by her cell, its insectoid body encased in gleaming exoskeletal armor, compound eyes flashing with cold intelligence. Processing in 30 minutes, the guard announced, its translator producing the words in a flat, mechanical approximation of human speech. Kira nodded acknowledgement, appearing compliant. The guard moved on, satisfied. What the Vrexians didn't understand was that their neural dampeners had a fundamental flaw when used on humans, particularly humans like Kira Jensen, whose mind operated on levels that defied conventional classification. Before her capture, Kira had been the lead systems engineer for Earth's defense network, responsible for integrating dozens of disparate technologies into a cohesive defensive grid. Her colleagues had marveled at her ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. The military brass had called her approach unorthodox but effective. Her captors would soon learn just how dangerous that combination could be. The neural dampeners worked by creating interference patterns in standard neural pathways, disrupting the connections needed for complex thinking. But Kira's brain had never operated along standard pathways. Where others thought linearly, she thought in interconnected systems. Where others saw separate components, she saw a single living network. The transport ship docked with an orbital processing station above a planet that gleamed like a dark jewel against the void. Obsidian mining facilities covered its surface, extracting the rare mineral that powered the Vrexian war machine. Kira and the other prisoners were marched through a series of security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last. To an ordinary prisoner, the layered defenses would appear impenetrable. To Kira, each represented a node in a system, and all systems had patterns, rhythms, and vulnerabilities. Human female, specialized skills, assigned to Refinery Sector 4, a processing officer declared after scanning her neural patterns. The refinery was a marvel of alien engineering. Vast chambers where raw obsidian was processed into nexite, the exotic material that powered Vrexian quantum drives and weapon systems. Massive machinery hummed and pulsed, transforming the raw mineral through a series of precisely calibrated reactions. The air was thick with an acrid smell that burned Kira's nostrils as she was assigned her station along with a dozen other prisoners. Output targets must be met, her supervisor, a Vrexian named Drex, informed them. Failure to meet quotas results in nutritional restriction. Kira nodded dutifully and took her position at a calibration console. The work was mentally demanding but repetitive, monitoring quantum fluctuations in the refining process and making minute adjustments to maintain optimal efficiency. For most prisoners, the combination of neural dampeners and mind-numbing repetition would eventually break their spirit. For Kira, it was an opportunity to learn the system from the inside. Days turned into weeks. Kira performed her duties with quiet competence, never drawing attention, never making waves. But her eyes never stopped analyzing. Her mind never stopped processing. She began to understand the rhythms of the refinery, not just the machinery, but the guards' patrol patterns, the communication protocols, the maintenance schedules. She noticed the subtle fluctuations in the quantum field generators, the slight instability in the molecular reconfiguration process. Most importantly, she began to understand the true nature of nexite. The mineral wasn't just a power source. It was a quantum-entangled material with properties that defied conventional physics. Each processed batch maintained a subtle connection to all other batches, a feature the Vrexians exploited to create their formidable communication networks and weapon systems. That connection was also their greatest vulnerability. In her third month of captivity, Kira made her first move. During her shift, she introduced a minute calibration error into the quantum field generator, too small to trigger any alarms, but significant enough to alter the molecular structure of the nexite being processed. The change was subtle, a 0.03% variation in the resonance frequency, barely detectable by standard instruments. To her right, a crystalline being from the Aldebaran system, a species the Vrexians valued for their natural affinity for energy manipulation, noticed the change. Their faceted eyes shifted toward Kira, a silent question forming. Kira made a slight gesture with her hand, a movement that appeared natural but conveyed a deliberate message. Wait, watch, learn. The Aldebaranian returned to their work, but something had changed. A connection had formed, the first strand in what would become a web of resistance. Over the next several weeks, Kira introduced similar minute changes to the refining process. Each alteration was too small to be flagged by the automated systems, but together they created a pattern, a signature that would be embedded in every batch of nexite processed during her shifts. And because nexite maintained quantum connections across all processed batches, that signature would gradually spread throughout the entire Vrexian supply chain. The effects wouldn't be immediate or catastrophic. There would be no explosions, no system failures that could be easily traced back to sabotage. Instead, the alterations would introduce subtle instabilities, tiny inefficiencies that would compound over time. Vrexian weapons would become fractionally less accurate. Communications would experience microsecond delays. Shield generators would draw slightly more power than they should. In isolation, none of these effects would be significant. But warfare, like everything else, was a system. And in complex systems, small changes could cascade into major disruptions. The first indication that her plan was working came during a routine announcement. The refinery overseer, a high-ranking Vrexian military officer, informed the workforce that production quotas were being increased due to unexpected resource demands from the front lines. The war against the remaining free worlds was requiring more resources than anticipated. Kira kept her expression neutral, but inside, a spark of hope ignited. The Vrexians were experiencing unexplained equipment issues, forcing them to compensate with increased nexite production. Her silent resistance had begun to bear fruit. That night, in the cramped prisoner barracks, the Aldebaranian approached her. Without speaking, verbal communication was too easily monitored. They made a series of subtle gestures with their crystalline appendages. To a casual observer, it would appear as random movements, perhaps a cultural behavior. But Kira understood. "What are you doing to the nexite?" Kira responded with equally subtle movements of her own, a makeshift sign language they had developed through weeks of careful observation. Introducing quantum instability. Small changes, big effects over time. The Aldebaranian considered this, then gestured again. Others want to help. Kira looked around the barracks. Several prisoners, a six-limbed Tesseri engineer, a pair of Mavorian technicians, even a reformed Vrexian political dissident, watched their exchange with barely concealed interest. Each had specialized knowledge, unique skills that could amplify her efforts. But trust was a precious commodity in a prison camp. She made her decision. "Tomorrow, second shift, watch for my signal." The Aldebaranian nodded almost imperceptibly and returned to their sleeping area. Kira lay back on her hard bunk and stared at the ceiling. The neural dampeners on her wrists continued their quiet hum, supposedly suppressing her higher cognitive functions. She allowed herself a small smile. The Vrexians believed they had created the perfect system of control. They were about to learn an important lesson about the danger of underestimating human ingenuity, especially when that human understood that the greatest weakness of any system was its own complexity. The systematic downfall. The resistance network grew in silence. No manifestos were written, no battle cries were shouted. Instead, a web of subtle signals, minute adjustments, and precisely calibrated sabotage spread throughout the Obsidian refinery complex. The beauty of Kira's approach was its invisibility. The Phyrexian monitoring systems detected nothing because they were designed to identify dramatic deviations, not the systematic introduction of microscopic flaws. By the third month of her operation, Kira had assembled an unlikely coalition. The Aldebaranian crystal being had recruited 3 others of their kind, each capable of manipulating energy fields in ways that enhanced Kira's alterations to the Nexite. A Tesseri engineer, with 6 limbs that could work independently, made simultaneous adjustments across multiple refining stations. The Mavorian technicians, with their photographic memories, tracked the complex patterns of changes to ensure no detectable repetition. Even the Phyrexian political dissident, an intellectual who had questioned the Empire's expansionist policies and been sentenced to hard labor, contributed valuable knowledge about Phyrexian command structures and decision-making protocols. The key, Kira explained during a rare moment when they could communicate openly during a maintenance shutdown, is to understand that we're not trying to destroy their technology. We're introducing a pattern of uncertainty. Uncertainty. The Phyrexian dissident's mandibles clicked softly. My species does not tolerate uncertainty well. Exactly, Kira said. Your military doctrine is built on absolute technological superiority. When that superiority becomes less absolute, the psychological impact will be as significant as the technical failures. The first major sign that their efforts were succeeding came 6 months into the operation. The refinery overseer called an emergency assembly of all workers. His exoskeleton seemed more rigid than usual, his compound eyes flashing with what Kira had learned to recognize as agitation. Production standards have fallen below acceptable parameters, the overseer announced. Quality control measures will be intensified. Any worker found responsible for substandard production will face immediate recycling. The threat was clear, but it was also revealing. The Phyrexians didn't understand what was happening. They were looking for individual saboteurs, not a systemic vulnerability that had been exploited with surgical precision. Reports began to filter down through the prison communication network. A Phyrexian battle group had suffered an unexpected defeat in the Cygnus sector. A forward operating base in the Rigel system had lost communication capabilities for 43 minutes during a critical operation. A planetary defense grid had experienced unexplained power fluctuations during a rebellion on Tau Ceti Prime, allowing the insurgents to evacuate thousands of civilians. Each incident was relatively minor in isolation. Together, they represented the beginning of a cascading failure in Phyrexian military operations. The neural dampeners on Kira's wrists seemed to hum with a different tone now, less confident, more desperate. In the central command hub of the Phyrexian Empire, Fleet Commander Zex Kaler reviewed the latest battle reports with growing concern. The holographic display showed a pattern of small but increasingly significant failures across multiple star systems. Explain this, he demanded of his chief tactical officer. We are investigating the possibility of a new resistance weapon, the officer replied. But our intelligence networks have detected no unusual activity, no new technology deployment. Then what is causing these failures? Zex Kaler's mandibles clicked in irritation. Unknown, Commander. The issues appear to be originating within our own systems, but diagnostics show no clear point of failure. Zex Kaler's compound eyes narrowed. The Phyrexian military had conquered 1,000 worlds through the application of superior technology and disciplined strategy. The idea that their systems could be failing without an identifiable external cause was unsettling. Trace the supply chain, he ordered. Every component, every material. Find the source. Back at the refinery, security protocols intensified. Random worker inspections became more frequent. Quantum scanners monitored brain activity for signs of deception or resistance. The Vrexians were looking for the traditional markers of rebellion: secret meetings, hidden weapons, escape plans. They found nothing. What they couldn't detect was the language of resistance that had developed among the workers, a complex system of minuscule gestures, subtle timing variations in routine tasks, and precise adjustments to refinery operations that passed information and coordinated their efforts. During a rare moment when surveillance was diverted, the Aldebaranian communicated urgent news to Kira. They are sending an investigative team from Central Command. They suspect the Nexate. Kira had anticipated this possibility. The Vrexians were methodical. Eventually, they would trace the problems to their source. But by then, it would be too late. "We accelerate," she signaled back. "Implement Phase 3. Phase 3 was the riskiest part of her plan. Until now, their sabotage had been subtle, designed to create cumulative effects over time. Phase 3 would introduce a more significant alteration to the Nexate's quantum structure, not enough to be immediately detected, but enough to trigger a resonance cascade through the quantum-entangled material already distributed throughout the Empire. The opportunity came during the midnight shift. The investigative team was scheduled to arrive the following day, and security was focused on preparing for their inspection. Kira and her 6 most trusted allies took their positions at key points in the refining process. With precisely coordinated movements, they introduced a complex pattern of quantum fluctuations into the Nexite stream. The change appeared as a minor processing anomaly, within acceptable parameters, but just barely. The automatic systems compensated, as they were designed to do, recording the incident but not triggering any alarms. What the systems couldn't detect was that the fluctuations followed a mathematical sequence, a resonance pattern designed to amplify through quantum entanglement. 3 days later, as the investigative team was still conducting their inspection, the first major system failure occurred. A Vrexian dreadnought in the Cygnus sector lost all weapon functionality in the middle of an attack on a resistance stronghold. The resistance forces, seizing the unexpected opportunity, launched a counterattack. The dreadnought was forced to retreat. Within hours, similar failures began to cascade across the Vrexian fleet. Communication networks experienced inexplicable outages. Navigation systems delivered incorrect coordinates. Quantum drives fluctuated between different power states. The Vrexian military machine, which had operated with clockwork precision for decades, began to stutter and fail. In the refinery, the investigative team finally made the connection. Emergency protocols were activated, and the refining operation was shut down immediately. But it was too late. The compromised Nexite had already been distributed throughout the Empire's supply chain, and the quantum resonance cascade was well underway. Kira was brought to an interrogation chamber, her neural dampeners set to maximum output. The lead investigator, a high-ranking Vrexian scientist, studied her with a mixture of anger and reluctant respect. "How?" he demanded. "How did you bypass our security protocols? How did you manipulate the Nexite without triggering our detection systems?" Kira looked at him calmly. "You built a perfect system," she said. "That was your first mistake." "Explain," the Vrexian demanded. "Perfect systems are predictable. Predictable systems can be understood, and anything that can be understood can be manipulated." Kira leaned forward slightly. "You thought the neural dampeners would suppress our creativity, our ability to think in complex ways. But you don't understand how human minds work. We don't just think linearly. We think in systems, in patterns, in relationships." The Vrexian's compound eyes flickered with what might have been uncertainty. One human could not have caused this level of disruption. One human didn't, Kira agreed. "I just showed others how to see the same pattern I saw. Every prisoner in this facility became part of a resistance network without ever attending a meeting or receiving an order. We communicated through the work itself, through micro-variations in timing, through subtle adjustments to refining parameters. We turned your perfect system against itself." Before the interrogation could continue, alarms began to sound throughout the facility. The quantum resonance cascade had reached a critical threshold. Systems throughout the Phyrexian Empire were failing simultaneously, not catastrophically, but with a precision that rendered them useless for military operations. In the confusion that followed, the resistance network made its move. Using access codes provided by the Phyrexian dissident, they deactivated the neural dampeners and security systems. The prison revolt was swift and largely bloodless. Most Phyrexian guards, faced with the failure of their technology, surrendered rather than fight. Within 24 hours, the Obsidian Refinery complex was under the control of the former prisoners. Similar uprisings occurred across a dozen worlds as the Phyrexian military, hamstrung by equipment failures, lost its ability to maintain control. 6 months later, Kira stood on the observation deck of what had once been a Phyrexian command vessel, now repurposed as a diplomatic ship. Representatives from 30 formerly subjugated species had gathered to discuss the formation of a new interstellar alliance, one built on cooperation rather than conquest. The Phyrexian Empire had not been destroyed. After the catastrophic failure of their military technology, they had been forced to sue for peace. Their territory had been reduced to their home system and a few nearby worlds. A new government, led by reformists like the dissident who had helped Kira, was slowly rebuilding their society on different principles. As Kira looked out at the stars, she reflected on the nature of resistance. The Phyrexians had expected sabotage, espionage, direct attacks, the traditional tactics of warfare. They had built their defenses accordingly. What they couldn't defend against was a fundamental reimagining of how resistance could work, not as a force opposing their system, but as a subtle influence working within it, redirecting its energies, exploiting its inherent patterns. "The delegation is ready for you," an aide informed her. Kira nodded. As Earth's representative to the new alliance, she had been tasked with sharing the lessons learned from the Phyrexian conflict, not the technical details of the resistance operation. Those would remain classified, but the philosophical approach that had made it successful. Understanding systems, recognizing patterns, seeing the connections that others miss. As she walked toward the conference room, Kira smiled to herself. The universe was full of systems waiting to be understood, and humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its military prowess, but its ability to see the patterns that connected everything, and to use that understanding to shape the future. Even the most unbeatable force could be defeated, not through superior strength, but through superior understanding.